What if I told you that one of the darkest chapters in American history isn't taught in most classrooms? That the foundation of a growing empire was paved with forced marches, broken treaties, and the silent screams of a people driven from their homeland? This is the story of the Trail of Tears, one of the most horrifying examples of human suffering ever carried out under the flag of the United States. It wasn't just a relocation. It was erasure, devastation, and genocide, and today we're going to walk that trail together through history and truth. Before European settlers arrived, the southeastern United States was a mosaic of native civilizations. The Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole had lived there for centuries. These were not primitive societies. They were highly organized nations with agriculture, towns, written languages, schools, and even their own constitutions. These native tribes were deeply connected to their land, spiritually, culturally, and historically. But that land was valuable. When settlers began to flood into the South, driven by hunger for land and wealth, tension grew. Things exploded when gold was discovered on Cherokee land in Georgia in 1828. With greed now added to pressure, settlers and politicians turned their eyes toward forced acquisition. Treaties previously signed with native nations were ignored, twisted, or outright violated. The countdown to tragedy had begun. The U.S. government referred to these tribes as the 5 civilized tribes, due to their willingness to adopt certain European customs. But this label didn't protect them, it only made them targets. Their successful adaptation made their lands all the more attractive. If these Native Americans had towns and farms and homes, why couldn't white settlers have them instead? That was the poisonous thinking of the time. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act into law. This legislation gave the federal government power to negotiate relocation treaties with Native American tribes. But let's call it what it really was: legalized displacement. The act gave moral cover to theft. It made forced migration a matter of national policy. It stripped people of their humanity and reduced them to obstacles in the way of expansion. Jackson, a war hero and self-declared champion of the common man, believed deeply in removing Native Americans from their land. He saw them as impediments to American progress. He even ignored laws and court rulings to achieve his goal. This wasn't about compromise, it was about conquest. He didn't just want Native Americans to move. He wanted them gone. The Cherokee resisted. They used the tools of the system itself to fight back. In a historic legal battle, Worcester versus Georgia in 1832, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Cherokee Nation was sovereign and that Georgia had no right to impose state laws on them. For a moment, it seemed justice might prevail. The highest court in the land had spoken in their favor. But President Jackson refused to enforce the ruling. He allegedly said, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." In that moment, the law was ignored. The rule of law had no meaning when the government chose to abandon it. Treaties became lies. Promises became smoke. And the Cherokee were left defenseless. Then came the military. Soldiers arrived to remove entire native communities by force. Families were rounded up at gunpoint, often with no time to gather possessions, say goodbye, or prepare for the journey. Homes were looted or destroyed. Livestock stolen. Sacred places desecrated. Thousands were packed into makeshift camps that were filthy, disease-ridden, and woefully undersupplied. In the fall of 1838, the forced migration began. Over 16,000 Cherokee were driven westward, from Georgia to present-day Oklahoma. The journey spanned more than 1,000 miles. Men, women, and children traveled mostly on foot through harsh winters, swollen rivers, and endless mud. This brutal march became known as the Trail of Tears. It was one of the deadliest migrations in U.S. history. Estimates vary, but at least 4,000 Cherokee died along the way. Some say more. That's 1 in 4 people. They died from exposure, starvation, dysentery, whooping cough, and grief. The sick were left to die. The elderly collapsed and were buried in shallow, unmarked graves. Children didn't survive the cold. The trail was lined with death and sorrow. It was genocide through exhaustion. Mothers carried lifeless infants. Husbands buried wives. Families mourned in silence, too tired to cry. There are stories of soldiers who showed moments of compassion, and many more who showed none. The U.S. Army and contracted agents treated the Cherokee like cargo, not people. For the government, it was just a logistical operation. For the Cherokee, it was the end of the world. The Cherokee weren't the only ones. The Choctaw were removed first in 1831. They marched through freezing rain without adequate clothing or food. One observer called it a trail of tears and death. The Creek followed, then the Chickasaw, then the Seminole. In total, over 100,000 Native Americans were forcibly removed from their ancestral homelands. The Seminole resisted fiercely. In Florida, they waged the Second Seminole War, a brutal and costly conflict that lasted years. Led by Chief Osceola, they used guerrilla tactics to fight U.S. forces. Some Seminole were captured. Others escaped into the swamps, where their descendants live to this day. The government's mission was to remove them all. It never fully succeeded. Each of the 5 tribes faced their own trail, their own tears. The land they were forced onto, now Oklahoma, was unfamiliar and often barren. Promised aid rarely arrived. Disease continued to spread. Food was scarce. The cultural trauma was deep. And yet, they endured. They survived. They began to rebuild. But the damage was irreversible. What did America gain from all this suffering? Cotton. Slavery. The removal of Native Americans opened vast territories for white settlement and plantation agriculture. This directly fueled the Southern economy and deepened the institution of slavery. The price of that prosperity was paid in Native blood. The Trail of Tears was not just about racism, it was about capitalism. The cost to the U.S. government was enormous in dollars. But the cost to humanity cannot be measured. Thousands of lives were lost. Centuries of culture were disrupted. Oral histories were broken. Sacred land was desecrated. Generations were traumatized. And yet, the story has been whitewashed, downplayed, or ignored in most history books. In Oklahoma, life remained hard. The new land lacked the fertile soil of the Southeast. Tribal governments struggled to regain stability. Cultural revival was slow and painful. Many natives tried to keep their traditions alive in secret. Christian missionaries flooded the area, seeking to civilize those who had already been civilized and stripped of everything. Despite this, native nations began to rebuild. They formed new schools. They rewrote constitutions. They formed councils and alliances. The Cherokee Phoenix newspaper reemerged. The Creek and Choctaw rebuilt their tribal capitals. But they carried with them the trauma of removal. That pain has never fully healed. The Trail of Tears is not ancient history. Its legacy is visible today, in land disputes, in broken treaties, in poverty, in native suicide rates, and in the loss of language and culture. Generational trauma echoes in every corner of Indian country. Yet so many people don't even know it happened. Or worse, they think it was justified. This was genocide. Let's call it what it was. The United Nations defines genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy a group, in whole or in part. The Trail of Tears fits. It was not just about territory. It was about destruction. A deliberate effort to erase native presence east of the Mississippi River. Genocide by starvation, exposure, and abandonment. Today, there are memorial walks that retrace the Trail of Tears. Tribal elders share stories of the journey. Monuments mark some of the locations where thousands died. But there are many more unmarked graves, forgotten stories, and unheard voices. We must remember, not as a guilt trip, but as a call to truth, healing, and justice. Some schools still avoid teaching this. Some textbooks reduce it to a paragraph. Some politicians celebrate Andrew Jackson without mentioning the suffering he caused. And yet, Native peoples remain. They are not extinct. They are not relics of the past. They are survivors, warriors, storytellers, and leaders. We must listen. We must read Native authors, support Native artists, and amplify Native voices. We must respect tribal sovereignty, honor treaty rights, and advocate for historical truth. Silence is complicity. Apathy is betrayal. Memory is resistance. The Trail of Tears may have ended geographically, but its path winds through American history to this day. It lives on in redlining, in broken promises, in pipelines pushed through sacred land. It lives in every legal battle fought in courtrooms across the country. It's not over. It never really was. And yet, despite it all, Native communities continue to rise. Languages are being revived. Traditions are being restored. Youth are reclaiming their heritage. Elders are passing down wisdom. The spirit that was supposed to be crushed walks proudly again. Let this documentary be more than a history lesson. Let it be a mirror. What kind of nation forgets its crimes? What kind of people walk over the bones of the fallen without learning their names? We must not forget the Trail of Tears. We must walk it in memory, not in silence. Thank you for walking this path with us. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share it. Talk about it. Research more. Support Native-led organizations. And always, always, remember, the story of the United States is incomplete without the story of the people it tried to erase. The Trail of Tears is not just Native history. It is American history. And only by facing it can we begin to heal.